Fake news is as old as the news itself. Part of the reason is because anyone who had a dissenting view on the news could easily be labeled fake news back in the days 5,000, 6,000 years ago. It has always been there and it will continue to be there. The issue of what really has happened in today's time, why it has started hurting and damaging, and why there is so much hue and cry, is that the speed of information has increased. Underneath that, there is this concept of decentralization of information space. Now, if you look at most of the people that are creating noise regarding fake news and disinformation, these are mostly people who are sitting in the power circles, who are part of the status quo, or who have been in the traditional power stakeholders like traditional media houses, traditional governments, and all other different elements of power.
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where I put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders and change makers from around the world. Today I'm joined by a guest to speak about technology and narratives. My guest today is Dr. Hussain Nadim, co-founder of Third Eye, a real-time data analysis platform. Hussain is also a former Morris Greenberg Fellow at Yale and has served in various policy positions with the government of Pakistan. Dr. Hussain Nadim, welcome to InferTalks. Now, as I start my conversation, the very first question that I would like to ask you, if you could walk us through some of the most common means and methods to influence mass perceptions online.
When you talk about online perceptions, they're not different from any perception, offline perceptions either. And to understand the perceptions, we need to first take stock of exactly how perceptions, or let's say narratives, or even the better word and more live one layman's word is to use the stories. How stories are shaped, how stories are made, how they are shifted, how they're changed, how they're influenced. So really, when we talk about perceptions online, what we really talk about is essentially the stories that define the psychological makeup of humans and societies over the past thousands of years. So what does it take to, for instance, shape online perceptions or stories for that matter? Again, the fundamentals of this go back to the very root of it. It is essentially to do with the power of words. When we talk about words, that is extremely important because, in terms of the discursive analysis, the words have a very powerful impact on how they shape the narratives, how they shape the stories, and beyond words, there are other elements to it, which includes the imagery, which came later in the time before the images weren't there. It was really the words, but then the images, then the videos, and then the short form video content which started coming in during the time of digital media revolution. Now, this is something that we can unpack over the next 2 to 3 hours, covering the 5,000 years of history, how the verbal language has evolved into a written language and into then the digital nodes that define and that shape the narratives. The specific tools of shaping the narratives, or let's say the stories, again, you mentioned about the perceptions, is related to first and foremost the messaging. Then it comes becomes very important part about the medium that is being used, and the third element to it is the ability to have a very strong network effect. Now this is going to be a little bit more technical when we talk about it, but on social media, the reason why it has more powerful, why it has this element of virality to it, it is because it allows a particular network effect. What we've seen in the past 10, 15 years is a decentralization of information systems. What basically means is that information, which was once the essential core component of a Westphalian state order, the monopoly on information, shifted away from the state to the non-state actors, including private TV channels and also individual broadcasters on social media. And that allowed the network effect to take place with information being relayed in real time from one network to another network. Now, this is completely it's not filtered at all, which essentially means that information doesn't have to be verified. It doesn't have to be credible. It doesn't have to have a component of a component of intelligence to it. It can be a very random meme. It could be a funny content with zero intellectual input, and yet it could have a network effect and go around to billions of views. Now, this is an age where we're living, where digital decentralized information systems have become very popular in shaping narratives. The colors you use, the packaging of the content, the messaging of the content, all these are different variables, various tools that are deployed for perception management. And again, there is no specific component to perception management. What I'm talking about are basically the fundamental pillars, which include, again, the messaging part, the medium part, the content form part, and how you're able to have a network and a multiplier effect of that content.
Okay, could you now elaborate on how this particular landscape has evolved over the last few years, especially in terms of the usage of bots for disinformation? If you could give us a primer on how that landscape looked like in the recent past and where it's headed now.
I'll give you an overall landscape of how the information space has really evolved. And that is exactly what we're talking about right now. And I'll get to the boards at the later end of the conversation. If you look at the information space, and something that I covered in my last question, it has evolved over the past 5,000 years. But the fundamentals of information space hasn't really evolved. So 5,000 years back, there was information through verbal messaging. The word of mouth was very important, which is why one of the reasons why the element of trust in people was very important, because it was the people that were the carrier. They were the mediums. The language was verbal. It wasn't recorded. So the individual element of trust was reliant upon the person's credibility. So you were, as a human, you were a platform. You were also a producer. You were also a consumer, and all of that. So that kind of started shifting when the verbal language and the information started getting processed onto tablets, onto writing. Things started getting recorded. So when things started getting recorded, there was a particular proof. So the trust from human kind of shifted from from because of the medium changing in the course of thousands of years, where now human was less important. What was recorded on paper and what was signed became the essentially a gold standard. And then when we talk about thousands of years later, it became the digital place where we are in, where it's not only the humans, it's not only what is written, but what is heard, what is viewed, the imagery, the context, the sense, the feel, all of those combined that you get, they have become a new standard of information dissemination. And if you look at what's happening in this information space, there is a particular element of trust that is shifting. Now, the problem right now with the digital space, if you ask me how it has evolved in the past decade, it is that it is not able to discover the element of trust. And I repeat that it is not able to discuss the element of trust. A lot of organizations like New York Times, Washington Post, and Guardian, they try to develop their own fact-checking mechanics to somehow figure out a way on how we can fact check information or we can develop trust. The issue was that the fact checkers started getting fact checked. Now that is the fundamental issue where we are right now, where the element of trust does not has not really evolved or has not really developed in the social media space, which is still in its very infancy stage and has not been able to find its, let's say, bearings. I would say that if you have to give a comparison, social media is still in a hunter-gatherer environment at the moment. It will take it some more time before it starts getting evolving, and then to develop that element of trust and the institutions and the infrastructure of trust over the period of time that it will develop. And part of the work that I'm actually doing is related to specifically this thing on how do you develop a new truth infrastructure, a trust infrastructure for social media where people can actually uh, trust a particular platform for information. And that's what Third Eye is about. So the overall social media space, the way it has evolved, is not in terms of it's only the content, the messaging, or the format of the messaging. The underlying theme that is actually shifting is that element of trust that has moved away from the traditional media houses to the social media houses. Unfortunately, on the social media, we have not developed mechanics or a mechanism of trust. So, at the very outset, I want to specifically mention on this part that there is a lot of conversation about how fake news and bots and disinformation is plaguing the society and society is collapsing because of that. I have a very radical and a strong view on this subject. fake news is as old as the news itself. Uh, Part of the reason is because anyone who had a dissenting view on the news could easily be labeled fake news back in the days 5,000, 6,000 years ago. It has always been there and it will continue to be there. Now, the issue of what really has happened in today's time, why it has started hurting and damaging, and why there is so much hue and cry, is that the speed of information has increased. Underneath that, there is this concept of decentralization of information space. Now, if you look at most of the people that are creating noise regarding fake news and disinformation, these are mostly people who are sitting in the power circles, who are part of the status quo, or who have been in the traditional power stakeholders like traditional media houses, traditional governments, and all other different elements of power. Part of the reason why there is so much panic between them is because under the Westphalian world order, and specifically the nation states, the states had a monopoly on information. With social media, as that become devolved and decentralized, this new space where individuals got empowered and had the monopoly on information, uh, that kind of started breaking and changing the grounds under the power and the status quo. Now, which is one of the reasons why we see that every information that is not in line with the government's narrative, or I would say government's propaganda, is easily classified or labeled as fake news. Wherever there is a group of people or people who do not agree to government's policies, they're considered as bots or a bot-like activity. Bots have been there. There is no denial. They were there since ever. But in the past couple of years, the bot activity has reduced to almost none over social media because there are so many, specifically after 2016 elections in the US, there has been a really big backlash on bot activities, and the platforms have been able to reduce it to a particular level where bots don't define the national narrative. And I've said this in my previous shows as well, that if bots were to define the national narrative or a global narrative, then anyone with the money would be able to do that. Let's say Israel, or let's say United States, would be able to change the entire perception about Gaza war. But it has not been able to do that despite of spending millions and billions of dollars on different campaigns. So it's very easy for what I've noticed, that it's very easy for political leaders, governments to discredit anyone, discredit any voice by classifying and categorizing that as a bot activity or a disinformation network and etc. So yeah, I do think that uh, this has become a new sort of fancy word used by the power holders and status quo.
Very interesting. Building on something you said earlier about short video format, in pursuit of platforms like Douyin or TikTok, other social media platforms are promoting short videos as their preferred content medium. If you could elaborate on how that medium has changed the way we view content, especially now that our attention span has been reduced from several hours to a few seconds, and how that's transformed the information space.
This is a great question, and I'll explain the science behind this short form content and why it has become the way it has become so powerful over the last few years. And it has very little to do with the attention span. Attention span is actually a byproduct of what has happened otherwise. So the science behind it is basically that if you look at the last 10 years of data that has been produced by our world, and you compare that with the last 10,000 years of information and data that we produced, this 10 year is almost 100 times more than that. Or even if you compare last 3 years of data, that last 3 years of data is more double the size of last 5,000 years of data. What we're noticing is a flat line of data over the past 5,000 years, starting from 1990s and 2000, that exploded into a full horizontal line. That is how much data we are producing. And if all of you might have remembered that we have moved from uh, floppy disks to CDs to USB to cloud storage. That much of data we're producing now. We're developing new terms, zettabytes, yogabytes, etc., etc. Now, why that becomes very important is because when you're producing that much data, the human brain has not really changed. It has not really evolved over the years. There is no biological change to human brain in terms of its capability to handle data. The human brain is pretty much as it was 2, 3,000 years back. Sure, we become a little bit more fine-tuned, it's become more smarter and all of that, but its capacity to handle tons of data does not exist. It's exactly what it was 2000, 5000 years back. But the computer's ability and the human ability to produce data has become more. What this basically has created is a sort of artificial juncture in our technological and a human history, where you have humans with the brain and biological capacity to handle, let's say, a terabyte of data all throughout his life, now being exploded with so much data on every single minute, every single second, that it is unable to process. So, what do you do in that case? In that case, you rely on tools like artificial intelligence to help you, which one of our products is actually doing, or you rely on data analytics tool to help you crunch all of that information. So, at underlying what is happening is that explosion of data. Now, that explosion of data is basically consuming humans' time. Back in the days, people would get one book from the library because the library had about 100 books. So how much could you possibly read? So you would read one book a year because that was what was available. Now you have the entire world, entire universe open to you. You don't have the enough brain power, computational power. You don't have the time to consume all that data, which basically means that human capacity to read long material is completely washed away. Now you're moving from uh, an hour of broadcast to listening to or looking at 5 seconds, 10, 15, 30 seconds of TikTok videos. You don't have the ability to now read long form texts because that text does not really fit to the newer models of information processing, which your brain does not really calculate anymore because of the video form. So, in a subtle ways and in a not so subtle ways, our brain is changing in terms of what it prefers as a content. Our brain's ability to process all that information is changing. It's not growing, it's actually getting lower because it cannot sustain that much pressure on it. Henceforth, AI is becoming very, very important tool to actually change that. Now, the short form content, in terms of why you, in terms of your question, is a result of that. So it's not that somehow somebody created short form content and everybody started aligning to it. Somebody very smart thought conceptually and decided and figured out that the human brain and the consumption of content is moving in this direction. So, investing into, let's say, a new media channel which broadcasts like 45 minutes shows or something would not work. Somebody actually did the data, developed a strategy to figure out that the human brain would have only 5 seconds, 10 seconds time to be able to look at the data, process it, and wipe it out. And hence the product was created like TikTok or Instagram Reels and all of that. So I'm just trying to say that the order is reversed. It is not a product, it is a byproduct of what has actually happened in terms of the data and all. So if you want to ask me what is the future of the content going forward from 5-10 second clips, to forward. We already did that experiment at IPRI, by the way, when we started producing infographics, because infographics give you a quick instant picture. Picture is even more powerful than video at times because the video still has to move. The picture just goes through your mind in a nanosecond. So can there be something newer than that? Maybe. I have not discovered that, but that is what is in terms of the short form content, why it's important, the virality to it. It has a lot to do with how the data and the technology around the world has changed, yet your brain is still pretty much the same as your ancestors 4,000, 5,000 years ago, who were not using, by the way, any technology or anything. They were just looking at stars. That was the most important thing they were doing, probably.
All right. So you talked a lot about, a lot of organizations putting up fact-checking mechanisms, and just generally how the evolution of trust hasn't really taken hold in the digital realm. Where do you see that element of trust going? How do you see someone inculcating trust in the digital space with all the standards of credibility having been compromised due to this data mushroom cloud?
Trust is, I mean, this is a philosophical question that you've asked, and it is it is a lot to do with the core fundamentals of what trust is built upon. The modern definition and the concept of trust is built upon a particular cultural, religious, and contextual ethos, the stories we were told growing up, the stories that have built and shaped this modern civilization, Islamic civilization, Western civilization, the Chinese civilization. They have all pretty much same ideas around what trust is. Yet our species is very primitive. Uh, Trust is seen in a particular philosophical way as an ability to uh, operate in a world knowing in a base level, knowing that the other person will operate in by the same rules. So I'll give you one small example of this in terms of the trust. Every time I go out in a car, I am trusting not just my driving skills that I know how to drive, but every time I'm on the road, I'm trusting that others also are going to be doing what the law and the rules require them to do, which is not to hit my car. So it is on that trust that I pass by or overtake another car, knowing that the person would not bump into me by anger or by what the certain laws. Now these laws are not written, they're codified into the society because the way the, let's say, the urbanization is done, or let's say the motor vehicle rules are being laid out, they've been developed. Now you don't need to have laws in that to be to be developing that trust, but trust at a very basic level is an understanding between a group of people, an individual, or a society, that there are certain rules that are laid out and there are certain rules that are not laid out. And in those gray areas and the, I would say, the muted rules, you trust each other not to do a particular thing. It's the organized structure. Now that becomes very important. The rules are rules, the legal frameworks are legal frameworks, although in some parts of the world, even those are not followed when it comes to constitution and other elements. But let's say in places where they are followed, the gray area of trust becomes when there are no rules to it. Let me give you an example of it. In the United States, there is a huge conversation related to, let's say, gender right now. Male, female, aqua, cis, etc., etc. Now, in some ways, they have a particular point, and that point is that these things have been formed based on a particular level of trust. Trust in the sense of how do we define a particular thing? How do we codify a particular thing? Which basically means that in a modern society, if the science has surpassed us so much, the element of trust needs to change on these. Now, I'm talking about a very base level stuff. So, when we talk about social media, I'll bring this conversation into social media. The social media as a new dimension of information infrastructure, as a new dimension of information sharing, as a new dimension of a public space, will require a new concept of trust. It does not, and it will not be able to carry over the same fundamentals, the same concept of trust that existed in the mainstream media houses or in the newspapers. Now, this is something very interesting. And forget about social media right now. Let's take about let's talk about the newspapers, and let's talk about the broadcast media, the TV channels. When the broadcast media came in, the newspapers had a huge struggle and a huge protest around it, based on the fact that this new form of media, because it is in the video format, because it is in a live format, that the accuracy of the information, that the sensationalization of the reporting, and all of those elements that create a sort of trust of people in the news does not lay over. So the mainstream broadcast media does not play by the same rules. So the broadcast media, and I'm talking about the US right now, but the exact same story was happening in Pakistan in the 2000s, when there was a whole privatization of media. And I remember the traditional media newspapers were going crazy over it. That these 24 hours media channels, they have no rules, they have no ethical standards, they're not doing any trainings, their journalists are not trained, the broadcasters are, somebody's a doctor, somebody's an engineer, and he's now sitting on a TV giving sermons. So the element of trust kind of changed. Now, there was a very short-lived moment over there in the 2000 and 2010 when newspapers and media houses were fighting with each other. Enter the digital age, 2010 onwards, where they realized there is a newer, bigger beast. So the media houses, the broadcast media that was using the arguments against the newspapers that you're outdated, you don't know and all. What they were really talking about is that yet your concept of trust was relevant for the newspaper. We've developed a new trust infrastructure. Now, these people did not realize that they'll be outdated very soon by the digital media. Now, the digital media emerges, and you see the same anchors on on media houses, same broadcasters, same TV people now started hating social media. I mean, there are anchors who have their bread and living because they had a monopoly on truth and trust. Now, all of a sudden, they don't have the monopoly on neither the truth or the trust. The social media space did something incredible. It decentralized the information space, but with decentralization, it also did something else. It decentralized truth, and it's also decentralized trust. Now, you could trust an absolutely nameless account. You don't even know who the person behind that account is, but you're able to trust based on specific thing, which is the information that is being shared. Now, not an individual. Now, in the older versions of media houses, and the traditional media houses, it was the name that mattered. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Geo News, ARY. That was the element of trust. The information was a second layer of trust. Over here now, the account does not matter. It could be a random account with 15 followers, yet the account shared a good information which clicked to your senses. All of a sudden, it's viral. You click a follow button. Now you have signed up to an account which you trust. Every time you follow an account, have you ever followed an account that you don't trust or you don't follow or you don't like? The reason why you follow an account is because when you trust an account to convey some information which clicks to you, it could be funny, it could be political news, it could be whatever. So the element of trust, if you look at in social media, it has changed. Now, as I've said, I don't know exactly what the entirety of that trust would look like, what the new trust infrastructure would look like. But think of it as an infrastructure. The infrastructure of trust in the newspaper, in that information space, was different compared to the media houses, the broadcast media, and now to the social media. A new truth and trust infrastructure will have to be built. The chaos that we see right now on social media and why the people and the traditional people hate social media so much and why they keep blaming the bots, the troll farms, this, that, is because there is a new trust factor, there is a new truth factor, and in that game, they're not relevant because that time has passed. Now, a lot of them moved from media. I mean, I'll give you an example of Tucker Carlson. He was fired from Fox News, developed a show on X, now has the highest views ever in history. So what was he able to do? It was not that he was able to move from Fox and Twitter and he just got. The thing he was able to do is that he moved from an outdated infrastructure of trust and truth, which was Fox News, and moved to a new space of infrastructure of truth, which was X. So the whole system and the structure around it kind of changed. Now, this is where it becomes very, very important when we talk about these issues, that we need to see social media not just as social media. We cannot view the information space specifically as a view. There is a whole conceptual science behind it, which is reshaping and redefining the fundamentals of how individuals interact. Social media is not just social media, it is where it's become a new public space, a new socializing. And in that socializing, there will be new truths, there will be new stories, there will be new mythologies, there will be new victims, there will be new heroes, there will be new villains, there will be new everything. And if you look at the politics around the world, from Pakistan to the US to Philippines to China to India, the social space is not just a representation of the actual space, it is the actual space on steroids, where the stories that are being curated and crafted, for instance, on TikTok, where political leaders have a new birth altogether, you look at that and you realize that this powerful format, this new infrastructure of truth, new infrastructure of information, is reshaping the society that we know as it is. So, these are very, very powerful moments, powerful technologies, very powerful moments, and those who understand how the science behind it works, and two, who do not see them as an enemy, will be able to use these platforms, these resources, including AI, for a greater good of the people. But yeah, but for many people, this is a changing moment in history, and those who have a lot to lose will naturally either cut down on social media or will probably more or less switch off the internet once every while whenever it is not going in their favor.
All right, Dr. Hussain Nadim, let's talk about the third eye. What is the concept behind this new venture or this new platform that you've built? What are the cases, or perhaps if I may say, what are the use cases, and how would you want it to evolve in the future?
So the reason why I created with my team Third Eye, the fundamental was to essentially do two things. One, we recognized that the growth in data and information space, uh, as I mentioned earlier, did not allow human brain to have the capacity to process it all. And it was in that inability of human to process all that information where it became vulnerable. So in terms of the crisis like Gaza, Ukraine, elections and all of that, the humans were most vulnerable because that is when the time was where there was a frequency of information was very high. And in that inability of human to process that information, the hostile actors would be able to plug information and manipulate the common citizens, in either polarizing messages or creating fake news that could create serious problems in terms of the elections, create problems in terms of like blasphemy cases and all sorts of negative things that can happen. So we created Third Eye as kind of like an AI personal assistant for users to use social media and navigate the narrative spaces. So you could just write down any keyword. Let's say you want to write Pakistan elections, the US elections. You could write President Biden, President Trump, and it would be able to take all the information from social media. The AI would be able to go all over it, run the analysis, and give you narrative clusters to be able to tell you that these are the positive comments, these are the negative comments, these 40% of the conversation is related pro President Biden, 30% is related to anti-Biden because of his Gaza policies, etc., etc. So that was one of the reasons why we built it, so to provide the users uh, a second brain and AI-powered ability to navigate the social media space. So it became a very powerful tool. Now, the second reason why we built it was because when you're using as a human your platform from your own account, the Twitter, Facebook, and all, they all follow your behavior. And then they could start creating echo chambers. So whatever you like, whatever you see, wherever you take a pause, they know it. And that's when they realize that this person has this particular bias. So they keep feeding you their bias. The reason why they want to do that is because they want you to be hooked on to the platform. And the way to do that, and nothing works better as a cocaine or a drug, is they keep reconfirming your biases. So they keep pushing you the same content as part of the policy of the platform to keep you engaged. Now, what Third Eye did was to defeat this algorithmic bias. The way we did that was if you search, let's say, anything on your own social media handle, you will start seeing stuff that are mostly related to what you believe in. But if you look for that same information, let's say that for Elon Musk, you put Elon Musk's name on our dashboard, it will tell you all the perspectives on Elon Musk, the good, the bad, the ugly, the best, the right, the left. Now, that is one of the things that we wanted to do, was that we were making sure that the users are able to break the echo chamber and see that why people don't like or like President Trump, so that that polarization could be reduced. uh, what I've been doing for the past couple of years is, and specifically for the last 2 years, is building AI machines and technology that can help serve public good. And the greatest public and democratic good that we can actually serve right now is by allowing and empowering humans with the AI technology in how they can use and navigate the information space. If we're able to empower the humans in their ability to use AI to get the right information, to process all the information, our job is done. Because then human decides what is and what isn't fake news. The humans decide whether they should have more solidarity with Gaza or with Israel. It is not the job of us as a platform to manipulate that information. Our job is to collect all the information, use AI, and present all views to the human as a third eye so that they can help take good decisions. So that's what we're doing. We've deployed the product as a launching pad in the Pakistani elections, and we had an excellent feedback on it. We were able to get a lot of traffic on our platform. Uh, the As a startup, we were very lucky that our platform didn't crash while we were getting the traffic, so that was a big win for us. And the next stage, we're going to be launching this for the US elections, the Indian elections, and also the elections in Philippines that are supposed to become. So we're going to be launching this in 4 different markets.
Dr. Hussain, Nadim, thank you very so much for having joined us today for this conversation and for walking us through with such an enlightening discourse on technology, AI, politics, and how narratives are formed. Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Dr. Hussain Nadim. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content. And if you'd like to stay updated on upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.